Hey Sheepdogs, welcome back to the Sheepdog Project. I am afraid I have some bad news. I know that I had promised you that Tim would be back from abroad this week and we'd be able to record together. Sadly, that has not occurred. Tim is still traveling. However, the good news is I am now traveling with Tim. We are together. Yay! We are in Austria. That's Austria, you rednecks, not Australia, so no, we're not chasing kangaroos. Tim is right here with me. How you doing, my brother?
Fantastic. I'm so happy to finally see some friendly faces. And we'll get to chat. Sorry I've been absent.
No, it's all good. It's all good. And we're doing great things. And we have an additional bonus, a treat for our listeners. Because joining us is our co-investigator from Hunting Hitler, renowned historian, Mr. James Holland himself. James, welcome to the Sheepdog Project.
Why, thank you, Mike.
It's a pleasure to have you here, to be here in this country, traveling with you, and to have you here on our show.
It's also nice to be doing podcast American style.
I know, right?
Not sort of, tight, straight-laced British way.
Yeah. Should we be in tuxedos? Would we be more comfortable if we're...
Definitely. Pinstripe suit.
Yeah.
Somebody bringing us a cup of tea and some biscuits.
Absolutely, yeah. Hot crumpets and jam.
Yes, all that. Hot crossed buns, as it were.
Yeah.
For our listeners who might not... pretty much everybody who listens to this watches Hunting Hitler, so a lot of them know who you are, but they might not be familiar with your body of work outside of Hunting Hitler, and that's probably what you're the least well known for, because you've done so many things. So talk a little bit about that, about your background.
Yes, well, I'm primarily I write big fat chunky books, door stoppers, about World War II. I'm a 100% World War II historian. I did a series for the BBC once on post-war jets and called Cold War Hot Jets. I've done some First World War stuff, but basically I'm a Second World War historian, World War II historian. So I write big fat books. I've done Dam Busters Raid, I've done North Africa, I've done the Italian campaign. I am in the middle of a trilogy, which is published in the States as well, a new history of the Second World War in the West. So kind of looking at... It's really interesting. I mean, you guys will know this, but kind of war is understood to be fought on three levels: strategic, tactical, operational. Now, the strategic, as you guys will know very well, is the big aims. The kind of this is the kind of heads of state level. This is Churchill, Roosevelt, your senior commanders, and all the rest of it.
This is the big room in the basement with the little plastic ships that they're moving around in.
Exactly that. Then you got the tactical level, which is what you guys do: cold face of war, the shooting. Guy with rifle, bloke in tank, chap in P-15, 51D Mustang, etc. What has been left out of the narrative is the operational level. So if you read a narrative history of World War II, what you get is lots on, Eisenhower and Roosevelt. You get lots of, PFC Schultz and his foxhole in the Bocage in Normandy. What you don't get is the nuts and bolts. And the nuts and bolts, the economics of war, logistics, all the rest of it, supplying Hershey bars, really good medical care, the fact that you can, your Sherman tank might be knocked out one day, but it's back in action the next day. All that stuff is just kind of sort of put to one side.
Putting Lucky Strikes in C rations.
All that stuff. Once you put that operational level back into the narrative, our overall view of World War II changes dramatically. And it makes the USA look even better. It makes Britain look a whole load better. And it makes Germany look a whole load worse. And it is really, really interesting. And what you discover is that over the last sort of 70 years, a huge number of myths have emerged about the narrative of World War II that we now absolutely take as read. And they've become so entrenched, they've almost become a kind of truth. But they're not a truth. It's misleading. And so what I'm trying to do with this new narrative three-part history is change how we view the World War II and think about it in a slightly different way. Think about it in those three levels of war, not just two.
It's a fascinating perspective. If you look historically through all massive campaigns, all massive wars, the one that is always omitted is the operational perspective. In the Civil War,
it's not sexy.
No, it's not.
Well, do you know what?
Necessary.
I would disagree with that, because while I've been researching this operational level, it's still rooted in amazing human drama. Henry Kaiser, Bill Knudsen, these legends that turned America from being completely behind the eight ball into the arsenal of democracy that it famously became. I mean, that level of war production was no way guaranteed. Yes, the USA had the potential. Could it deliver on that potential was an entirely different kettle of fish altogether. And what you've got in there is some massive personality clashes, some incredible drama, and some really riveting stuff. It's not boring at all.
I'm not disputing that it's not there, but it's not, if you're going to look back through the movies that are made,
right?
You don't see, maybe they touch in a very, very light hand what happened. And for the Civil War, it was completely lost by logistics.
Of course, it always is. Any war that goes on for more than about 2 days.
Why were the Romans so successful? It was because they're really good at hygiene, and they're really good at feeding their troops, and they're really good at getting them the equipment that they needed. Yes, they're good at tactics. Yes, they're brutal. Yes, they're violent. Yes, they're conditioned. Like on the strategic level, they had brilliant minds when they were going to walk into Germania, near where we are right now, and start attacking, how they were going to do that. And then the soldiers themselves, on the tactical level, very proficient at what they were doing with the weapons that they had. But they were the reason that they became a near dynasty is because they're really good at feeding and equipping their troops, even over long, massive campaigns through some of the most treacherous terrain in the hardest conditions of winter in the Alps. They still kicked ass.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
it's just crucial. I mean, the point is, if you're watching, Band of Brothers, for example, which is just, my all-time favorite kind of TV World War II miniseries ever, all those guys just turn up. Their kit is just there. Their resupply of ammunition just happens. Food just appears. Whatever it is. Yes, okay, they're cold because they haven't got enough cold weather kit when they're in Bastogne, but it's lip service, and you're absolutely right. But that then feeds our broader understanding of the war, when actually it's much more complex, and the logistics involved of the Americans and the British in World War II is unbelievable. I mean, Britain alone produces 132,500 aircraft. That's a lot. And America produces 315,000. Well, Britain alone is producing 50,000 more aircraft than the Germans.
When you look at the most elite units on the planet today, the reason, Mike, you know this as intimately as I do, the reason that they are elite, they select some of the best soldiers that are physically and mentally strong. And strategically, the planning of how they're going to execute their jobs is also nearly flawless, but they're the best equipped. When special operations guys, when we go somewhere, we fly there. We're not riding in a car. We're not in a tank. We're not walking.
Right.
We hop on this really kitted up stealth helicopter, and we fly in and we shoot a dude, and then we grab his body and put it on the stealth helicopter, and then we fly away. Of course we can do that very well because we have the best night vision on the planet. We have IR lasers. We have the best, highest tech equipment, and we're getting resupplied with the best ammo that soldiers can't even get. Hollow point this, better muzzle velocity, 5.56 for that.
And what that means is that you can perform on the ground to your absolute best because you've got the backup you need. Exactly. And that's the stuff but in years to come, when people are recounting the story of what you got up to, what they'll be focusing on is you going in on that chopper, landing, taking out bad guys, going back out again. No one will mention all that other stuff.
And it's not just that moment at the tip of the spear that it's evident. It's in all the training that goes up to that. Because say there was 8 years of training that preceded
train hard, fight easy, isn't it?
Right.
Is that the rule?
Yeah, and if during those 8 years of training you're able to concentrate on training, because you never say we had to cancel training because we ran out of bullets, or we had to cancel training because we have to paint our own barracks.
Yeah.
That's being provided for. The soldier. The warrior can concentrate on being the warrior because the operational logistical aspect is being taken care of. And the general has more latitude in planning. And Tim, you brought up the Civil War, and I think if ever there was a conflict, I know primarily we're going to be talking about World War II today, but if ever there was a conflict that I think illustrated this point just perfectly, it is the American Civil War. Why? Because all those generals went to the exact same schools. They knew the exact same tactics. They knew the exact same strategy, rather. The tactics on both sides was exactly the same. The arms were pretty much the same. It was the operational and logistical aspect that the industrialized states in the north could easily support, and the more agrarian states in the south could not support.
Yeah.
So at the end,
we didn't need cotton.
Right.
We needed lead.
It was beans and bullets.
We needed steel.
It's always beans and bullets. And at the end, it was beans
totally
and
concur.
bullets. Yeah.
I mean, you're absolutely bang on.
And Germany could not support the beans and bullets.
Well, the interesting thing about Germany in World War II is that not only does it not have the resources, it doesn't use those resources wisely. So, I don't think I'm doing too much of a spoiler to say that we're about to go to a potential V2 testing site here in Austria. And, I mean, the V2s tactically achieved nothing. Operationally were a huge headache. And strategically didn't end the war. So, they failed on kind of every single turn. I mean, the V2s cost twice as much as the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb. And all they were doing was targeting civilians, not military targets. So in actual fact, although it was really bad luck on the kind of 9,000 civilians that were killed as a result of the V2s, militarily they achieved absolutely nothing. What they actually did was shot themselves in the foot because they were using vast amount of resources which could have been used far better somewhere else. And this is the thing you see about Germany throughout the Second World War, and including during the Blitzkrieg years at the start of it, that they are just simply not prioritizing those resources properly. Whereas if you look at the USA, for example, and to a very large extent Britain as well, you see them making the absolute best of the resources they've got. Okay, so there's a few mistakes along the way and a few kind of dodgy decisions, but by and large, how they're using what materials, what assets they've got is really, really sensible. You can't really fault it. Whereas with Germany, they're constantly misdirecting those limited resources they do have to projects which are not going to achieve the goals that they set out for them.
Yeah, it's a curious thing because at the start of the war, they had such, we say a bad plan, and even a bad decision can be made up and compensated for by a violence of action. And they did not lack that. In 1939 and 1940, how the Germans were just crossing every border they could as fast as they could and taking whatever resources they had access to with pure violence of action. You didn't even know what hit you. All you recognized was that there was a bunch of tanks coming from your front and a really, really fast machine gun from the side.
Which, incidentally, is the age-old German way of war. I mean, this is what the Prussians did right into the 18th century and beyond. I mean, this is nothing new. What is new in 1939 to 41 is use of radio technology, which the French don't really have in the same way, and using air power, close air support. That's what the Luftwaffe evolves organically to become. But in other ways, they're doing what they've always done. Where it all starts to get sticky is when they start producing vast, incredibly heavy tanks and their speed of maneuver just absolutely plummets. And suddenly they're on the defensive and they're fighting this incredibly long defensive war, which ultimately they're never going to win. And so is completely pointless. But, that's why the war lasts as long as it does, is because of the maniacal will of the Führer not to give in. I mean, if you look at 1918, why did the Germans surrender? It's because they've run out of money and they're not going to win. Well, if you kind of apply that to World War II, you'd have thought Hitler would sort of throw out the white flag in maybe November 1941 when Barbarossa fails.
The Adolf Hitler, nasty son of a bitch.
Understatement of the century.
Yeah.
We just came from his home.
Yeah, the Berghof on the Obersalzberg.
Berghof and Berchtesgaden. We just spent a lot of time going into some of the most protected and hidden secrets of Adolf Hitler's personal life and how he was operating things not only from Berlin but also in southern Germany. And you're talking about the misallocation of his resources, and we intimately saw that, where he was sending some of the most valuable resources at the end of the war were south. Not towards the front, not towards the Russian front, not towards stopping the Allied invasion or maybe even having another stronghold. He was sending resources to annihilate a group of people. He was sending resources to move on, if the Third Reich failed, into the potential of maybe launching again the Fourth Reich.
And just think about how ridiculous it is that you would want to kill 6 million Jews, most of whom were it not for the Holocaust, would have probably fought on your behalf. That's 6 million men who could have fought for you.
Educated.
Well, not 6 million men, but say 3 million men that could have worked for you.
Hardworking.
And amongst them, some of the greatest minds. I mean, some of the people that were involved in the Manhattan Project were German Jewish scientists who kind of had to escape. They could have worked for Germany. On no level does it make any sense at all, apart from a warped ideological one.
Yeah, so the warped ideological one. The man's pure evil. And, we're seeing right now evil resurfacing, and people are astounded. They're like, wait, this is the first time this has happened. This is the first time that they're beheading people, that they're gassing people, that they're burning people. And I'm just shaking my head in disbelief, because the three of us sitting here, we know that this has happened dozens, if not hundreds of times throughout history.
In epochs in history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just in written history, we know, like right off the top of my head, I could think of like 6 different times that the exact same thing that's happening right now has happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is that in liberal Western democracies, we have largely been brought up on kind of sort of Christian ideals and Christian ethics and morals, in which you broadly see everyone as equal, love thy neighbor and all that kind of stuff. What you're looking at when you're looking at a Hitler, or you're looking at ISIL or any of these maniacs from history, is people who have absolutely no regard for their fellow man. They just don't look at them, and there is no empathy whatsoever. There's no fellowship at all. These are just people that are entirely expendable and have no worth beyond their own limited ideology.
Yeah,
this is the Roman view of the world, where you can have, a slave is effectively an Untermenschen, is an underclass of person, regardless of their intellect or background or whatever. They're a slave. I am not. So therefore they are beneath me. They are worthless, or they have a worth, but it's considerably less. And this is what Hitler does. He has no regard for human life, nor does Stalin, for that matter.
Yeah. Well, and you see today people that put beheading videos on YouTube. They don't want. That's not about expanding borders. That's not about getting Coca-Cola and Levi's. That's not about getting a better car. That's not about a living wage or climate change. That's about, they fundamentally see the person they're beheading as less than human.
Absolutely.
And that's the message that they want to send.
Yeah.
So this is not a new thing.
No.
The rise of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Taliban. You go to some even people that are praised and worshipped, like the Nelson Mandelas and the Che Guevaras. You have Saddam and you have Assad. These guys had their ideals and nothing else mattered, whatever those ideals were. And those ideals were never rooted in the preservation and sanctity of a human being. It was just their search for power, or their search for annihilating a group of people because you believe in a twisted version of eugenics. It's insanity, and it's what crazy people do. And we have a new group of crazy people right now, the radical Islam, the fanatics that are on the rise. But this is not new. This is repeated every 10, 15 years. But what the problem is people are trying to get rid of history. In the United States right now, we're taking down monuments. We're burning flags. I'm from California. I was raised on a farm. I don't care anything. I didn't even know that race was a thing because my brother's Korean. One of my best friends is black. And this was just normal. Like, nothing mattered. There was no skin color in my perception. And it wasn't until I got into the Army that I was like, oh, wait, people are weird about these things sometimes. And we're taking down these Civil War monuments, and we're burning the Confederate flag. And while those are, yes, disgusting examples of racism, they are also historic events that we can't forget. We can't forget that we had and do have a serious problem with racism. We can't forget that Adolf Hitler killed at least 6 million Jews and was the reason of tens of thousands of Europeans dying, tens of millions of Europeans dying. And so I posted this picture the other day. I was sitting at allegedly Adolf Hitler's piano given to him by his wife, and I was playing a famous Jewish song when I was sitting there, and a whole bunch of people are saying, no, you have to burn that piano. Why would he even sit there? And it was astounding, their ignorance to me, that they would want, one, they didn't understand the irony, that they can't even apparently put letters together to make words and words to sentences and sentences into concepts, that I'm sitting there at Hitler's piano playing a famous Jewish song, and they couldn't understand that I'm not a white supremacist, and I'm in fact making fun of Hitler. But they wanted to destroy this historic artifact because they didn't like what it stood for. You have to preserve and protect these historic artifacts because it will remind us about the mistakes that we've made. The only way that we're going to learn from history is to remember freaking history.
Absolutely. I mean, the point of studying the past is just so important, because if you understand the past, you can make sense of the present and you can start to prepare for the future. It's just as simple as that. And anyone who doesn't, I mean, it just drives me absolutely demented how little our senior politicians know about the past, about anything, but particularly history, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, let's go back to Iraq in 2003. I mean, you know, the decision to disband Saddam's police and army has got to be one of the most catastrophic ever made in history. And yet there are so many examples from the past of the point and show you that that is a really bad idea, that if you have an incredibly strong dictatorial leader ruling a bunch of people of different ethnicity and religions, and you suddenly get rid of him, that when you get rid of him, you're going to have a power vacuum, and into that vacuum is going to pour lots of bad elements, and you're going to have mayhem, which is why you need to maintain the police and the army. It's as simple as that.
We're talking about, you know, a century of repeating history. Now, if we look at Iraq, we can go from the macro of 100 years into a decade of 10 and see the mistakes that you make over, you know, a 100-year time period happening there in 10 years. So in 2003, we're like, okay, we don't like the Iraqi army, so we're and the police, so we're going to disband them. Boom, insert Al Qaeda, right? And then we have this rise of Al Qaeda.
Yep.
For the next 10 years, we're fighting Al Qaeda, right? 10 years later, what do we do in northern Iraq? We start removing ourselves, again creating a vacuum where we hadn't built up a military or police force there to be able to enforce the laws that we said were important.
And what happens into that vacuum?
Boom, ISIS. And then it happens with Boko Haram, and it happens with Gaddafi, and it's going to happen with Assad if we do the same thing. But we're freaking doing it every single time.
And using that same 10-year scale that you talked about. And this is one that I guarantee a lot of people listening have completely forgotten. 2003 was when we disbanded Saddam's police force and the military infrastructure. What happened 10 years before that in Yugoslavia? There's a word you don't hear too much anymore.
Yeah.
It was the same thing.
It's exactly the same thing.
It was the same
Tito's
thing.
dead, and
We're
suddenly all those factions that have been held together, suddenly the glue has gone, the control has gone, and they all just descend into the most brutal civil war.
Call the Serbs the Shias and the Croats the Sunni, and you basically have the same thing.
Exactly.
Having time. But you know who recognized, a person who recognized that in history was Patton. He recognized, you know, when he took over an area, he said, if I fire everyone who gave lip service to the Nazis, I will be firing everybody.
Yes.
I have to let, you know, the trains are running on time. The water is flowing. The electricity is flowing. There is peace in the streets, at least right now. If you want total chaos and people taking revenge on one another.
Well, I've just seen, I've been shown a remarkable photograph put in a book by a very, very brilliant Austrian historian called Gerald Steinecker. And Gerald includes this photograph, and it's in the southern Tyrol in northern Italy at the end of the war, and there is a German soldier and an American soldier together, both directing traffic.
Yeah.
Okay, and that is the mistake that, you know, that was not a mistake that the Allies made at the end of the war. You know, we're going around sort of hunting Nazis at the moment, and where they went to at the end of World War II. What is interesting is, yes, a huge number of them managed to get away to South America or wherever, but an awful lot of them were then reused, and, you know, after very, very short periods of time in prison, released again, because you have to rebuild the state. And some of these guys, for good or bad, you know, they're needed. They still have a worth. They still have a value in creating this new prosperous Western Germany, and now ultimately, you know, a united Germany. So, end of World War II, they kind of broadly speaking got it right, you know, whereas subsequently you got it wrong. And this is my point about learning the lessons from the past. All you got to do is go back, in 2003, you've only got to go back kind of 60 years. And there it is. There's your template.
Yeah.
Why cock this up? Why be arrogant enough to think that you don't need these people? I mean, it's just incredible.
So how do we change the current generation's perspective on what history is? Right now, everybody wants this diluted, whitewashed utopian bullshit of what life has been for the past 50 or 60 years. If it's a trigger word or if it offends them in any way, it shouldn't exist. So, I mean, the next thing besides taking down a monument or burning a flag, to me, is burning a book. And then after burning a book is removing free speech. And now you've moved.
Yes, and you're also getting into kind of mousy tongue kind of territory
100%.
where you're just eradicating, millennia of Chinese history and just saying there is no past. The past, history starts today.
Or like writing Trotsky out of history.
Right.
Yeah,
or right now in some European textbooks where the Holocaust is being almost omitted. Where it's okay, Hitler was bad. He did bad things. He started this war. He had these ideas about what a superior race looks like, and then he did things to try to create that. No, there's a lot more to that. He killed millions of people, like by gassing them and burning them.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to Auschwitz, but I mean, it is testimony to that complete horror, that terrible period in our world's history. And, it is maintained there, and it is unbelievably chilling when you go there. I mean, it is just horrific. It makes you feel sick. You feel depressed. It takes your breath away. It is truly awful. But there is obviously an incredible worth on maintaining it and going there and just thinking, Christ, this really, really mustn't ever happen.
Like everybody. I mean, I realize traveling is difficult and going overseas, but you have to, if you can't walk from the railroad into Auschwitz and see those freaking shower heads and not feel
sick and
disgust.
Yeah.
And
I was filming in there a few months ago. I was filming in the only gas chamber that still survives is Auschwitz I, in the original pre-war Polish army barracks. And I don't know if you guys have been in there, but you go in and right next door are the ovens, and there is a kind of slam tray in which you put the bodies, and you just slam it straight into you push it forward, and the bodies go straight into the ovens. And I was having to film there. And I was close to vomiting. I mean, I felt physically sick. It was just appalling. But the point I wanted to make about all this is we have to be very, very careful. I think, particularly when you're going back to the Civil War, when you're going back to the kind of, era of slavery. I mean, we've just had a big debate in the UK about whether you take the statue of Cecil Rhodes down from one of the Oxford colleges. Okay. By today's standards, Rhodes was a white supremacist and, did lots of bad things in South Africa, but he also did lots of good things. He was also a philanthropist and all the rest of it. My point is this, that you have to be very, very careful about putting 21st century sensibilities and morals onto something that happened hundreds of years ago, 50 years, 200 years ago, because that was a very different period then. And the point is this, that we are where we are now, liberal Western democracies where, large numbers of us think that gay marriage is absolutely fine and we have absolutely no issues with, what color of skin you are or creed or whatever. We have earned that. And we have earned that through evolving, through learning those lessons, through taking those sometimes painful steps and moving forward. Yeah. And it is essential that we are reminded that democracy has to be earned, that it is not a God-given right, that you have to reach this point through evolution, through development, through increased sophistication, through enlightenment. Exactly, Mike.
And that process is painful.
Yes, exactly.
That, I'm glad you said that, because that was exactly the point that I was thinking, is that history, like life, what do we know about life? What do you know? Everything is, the answer to every question is always jujitsu, right? You have to be painful in training to become enlightened in jujitsu and advance. And history is the same. We've had some very painful moments in human history. And out of those painful moments, there is enlightenment on the other end of that.
Yes.
It only comes with toil. It only comes with blood and sweat and pain. And when you start to take down those monuments and you forget that, then you stagnate because you don't remember what it takes to advance. And when you talk about the little things like Hitler's piano, and I know some people would look at little things like that, like Hitler's piano, like those home movies, and this is a phrase that I've heard kicked around, is people say, we don't ever want to humanize Adolf Hitler. Well, here's why I disagree with this. Because he was a human being. He was very evil. But evil came in a human form. And the moment we don't allow him and people like him to be humanized, we forget that evil will come again in a human form. Not with horns on its head, not with fire coming out of its eyes. It will come as someone in human form who enjoys very human things and is very human in many respects, but has a heart of evil.
I mean, I completely agree with that sentiment entirely, and I also completely agree that it's absolutely right that you maintain Hitler's piano. I mean, when we were walking in this building, and I have to say that I've been in a lot of World War II structures over the years, and that has to be the best preserved original Nazi building I've ever been into by some margin. You know, so that when you're walking into particularly into this conference room with a big long table, all the fixtures and fittings around of it, you are basically stepping back in time. That is a time warp from the Nazi period. So Tim, let me ask you this. When you're looking at that radio with those swastikas on, and you are half closing your eyes, imagining that conference table filled with Nazis, what are you feeling?
Fury, rage, disgust, frustration, but I'm also appreciating.
Yes, but you're also, that is making that reality more vivid.
Yeah.
It makes it real.
Okay? It's not a black and white photograph.
Right.
It's not something that's stuck in the past. This is something that's real. If you can somehow step back in time, which is what it felt like going into that room, suddenly you're in the moment. Mm-hmm. You're there. You are given a chilling, vivid feeling of what it must have been like to be in that period, just for that, and it's frightening. To sit at, okay, so we're joking. You know, you're putting two fingers up to Adolf by playing a Jewish song on his piano, but sitting there, you just do. You feel this kind of chill. The hairs on the back of your neck stand up, and that's very, very powerful. That powerful kind of tactile link to the past is really, really important. If you burnt down that building tomorrow, that would all be gone, and you'd never have that experience.
But I promise, if that building was in the United States right now, there would be a huge, massive percentage of people,
demolished.
40 some odd percent of the United States would push to have that building destroyed. Everything. The books burned, the piano burned, that chandelier with the SS and swastikas and the zodiac symbols, all of that gone.
The German eagle, even though the swastika has been chiseled off, the German eagle that was over the entranceway, people would freak in the United States
that was there,
if that
without
was
a doubt.
Yeah.
But also, you know, the other thing is, I mean, my own view is I think it was a mistake to destroy the Berghof. I also think it's a mistake to have blocked out the Führer bunker in Berlin. I think people should be able to go into it, because I know when we were walking down that enormous bunker underneath the Reichschancellor we're talking about in Berchtesgaden, all you feel is a sense of disgust and horror and the folly of the Nazi regime. Okay, yeah, you might admire the engineering prowess, but the biggest emotion you're feeling is one of just sort of, what a waste of time, how awful this was, how ridiculous this was. And it's a really, really important reminder. But if you don't have it, then you're dependent on pieces of paper and black and white photographs.
Now, who writes history?
The victor.
The victors write history. And if you don't have the evidence to remind us what really happened, you're just getting a single perspective into what actually occurred.
Yep.
And that's a massive fault. That's a major failure. We have to, and everybody deserves, we do not make monuments or idols to what Adolf Hitler was. He's freaking disgusting. Everything about him was nearly pure evil, but he was still a man. He was still a man that drank, and then we know, the three of us, we know
lots of tea. He liked his tea.
We know what he ate. We know what kind of women he liked, and he was
he liked his methamphetamine.
Yeah, he was a man that made mistakes, and just like you said, Mike, it is we are always just one or two decisions away from going down another path of evil, where we are affording a politician a little bit too much power, where we no longer need to take a decision and take it to Congress, and congressman is a reflection of their constituents, and it's just I'm just using my presidential powers, and now we have a dictator. It's a slippery slope into doing really, really horrible things.
Well, we're talking today, from obviously I'm a Brit, and we're talking kind of 10 days since Manchester, and just a couple of days since the latest outrage in London. And already in the newspapers this morning, there's talk of locking people up and internment camps and all the rest of it. And you're thinking, no, that's not the way. That's not the way. It's a worrying development. And one of the things I think is really, really important, and the importance of the past, is that our politicians really do study their history. Because if you don't, you do start thinking about knee-jerk reactions. You do start thinking just purely in the present. And I don't know how the system is in the US, but certainly in the UK, what used to happen in the old days was that if you want to become a member of Parliament in the House of Commons, which is the main house for making decisions and making laws, you would typically go off and have your life and be a professional and make some money or do whatever you did, learn some things about the world. And then you would feel that you had enough kind of gravitas, enough experience, and all the rest of it to warrant that great honour of being a member of Parliament. What is tending to happen now is that people do PPE, politics, philosophy, and economics at university, then get a job as a personal private secretary in Westminster, in Parliament, and you just sort of work your way up the rung, and your whole life has been stuck in kind of politics in this very narrow worldview. And that's got to be wrong. You want to experience people coming into it later. But also what you want to, if you are going to go down that route, you want to do something called applied history. So yes, do economics, do politics, and study that at school and at college, but also have applied history to that. And then you don't have David Cameron, who was Prime Minister in 2010, when President Obama came over to the UK on a state visit. And he stands up and says, in the 70th anniversary year of the Battle of Britain, for example, he says, in 1940, we were proud to stand as junior partner to the USA. And you just think, what freaking idiot would say that? I mean, that's just incredible. I mean, America wasn't in the war then, and you can seriously argue whether Britain was ever a junior partner during World War II. Maybe subsequently, yes, but not then, and certainly not in 1940. And that's schoolboy error. I mean, how can you stand there and say that as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom?
Yeah.
It's embarrassing.
So, how do we take the passion that obviously we have and impart that to this next generation that is missing a very elemental, necessary part of surviving, which is
here's the thing.
Fire.
Here's the thing that always gives me hope about history, is that I think it is the one subject that you study at school that you come back to later in life. I mean, no one gives up chemistry when they're 14 and then takes it up again at 28.
I don't do calculus as a hobby.
No, but how many people said, I had a really boring history teacher at school, and, I gave it up and decided to do geography instead, or whatever it is. But then when I was 26, I suddenly saw this program on telly, and that made me read a book, and suddenly I had this love of history. And, the next thing you know, you're kind of going on a battlefield tour to Normandy or something. That happens a lot. But I think what we've got to do is strive to make history exciting, appealing, make people want to read about it, make people want to watch documentaries about it, make people want to watch feature movies about it, and just get a love of our past and open that door. Because the more people that do that, the more people will understand the value of history, the value of the past, and the more we'll be okay.
Yeah,
I'm quite messianic about it, I have to say.
I agree.
I mean, I've started in the UK. I've started up a history festival called the Chalk Valley History Festival, and we have people from all around the world. And I know, Mike, we were kind of talking about you coming over, and maybe you guys could both come over next year. But it's talks, it's discussions, it's debates, it's B-17s flying over and Spitfires and stuff. We have living historians, and living historians is great because some of them are, these are reenactors, what they now call experimental archaeologists. These are your guys who go and do your Civil War, Gettysburg reenactments or whatever. Yeah. But the people who do this do it because they absolutely love it. They're passionate about the subject and they just immerse themselves in it, and they learn from the process of doing by living, eating, wearing, firing the same stuff. You understand that age more, and you can go and talk to these people and they'll really just at it all comes, and you can see, smell, feel the past in a way you can't by me standing up on stage and bleating about World War II.
So in the States, people that go to the reenactments, they're almost looked at like crazy people, like larkers in the park.
LARPers,
LARPers.
Yeah, they're like one step off from that.
Yeah, but there is no way that you can appreciate what it was like in Normandy unless you're there. There's no way you can feel what a soldier felt or imagine what, you can read it in a book, yes, and you can see where they were. Man, but you don that jacket, you put on that rough leather belt, you pull on those trousers, you put on that boot.
All that wool.
And
you crouch around in the bocage of Normandy.
For one day.
For one day.
Yeah.
And you're
a friend of mine suddenly realized that he didn't know enough about Dunkirk and the experience of the British retreat to Dunkirk. So he decided that was what he was going to do. So over one weekend, he went out to, the Pas-de-Calais, and he got himself dropped off, and then he put on entire period kit. He put on the serge battle dress, he put on the canvas belt, he put on the same boots, and he walked 35 miles
It's incredible.
to the beaches.
Yeah.
And when he emerged over the crest of the of the dunes, and there was the sea, he just collapsed on on his knees, and lots of people were helping him and stuff, and all the rest of it. Okay, he wasn't being bombed, he wasn't being shot at, but just that experience helped him understand the enormous effort that had been involved and just how exhausting it was. That was fascinating.
Like we've said before, that's what makes it real. It's not the black and white film.
Have you ever done that?
I have not. The one year that I was going to do it, I had a short notice deployment, and I ended up not.
So people do that, do they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done it a few times.
Yeah.
Have you?
And it's horrible.
Yeah.
It's absolutely
Is
horrible.
it? How interesting.
A 220-pound man, a professional athlete, collegiate athlete, genetics of Olympians, and I want to die.
Really?
By the end of it.
Yeah.
And, one of the reasons that we are doing this show that we're on right now, whatever about the narrative, whatever about the storytelling, we all love history, and we recognize how important it is in the current day affairs. So every time I pick up a book, I read a fiction book to kind of get inspired about an idea. Sometimes it's Les Miserables, sometimes it's The Count of Monte Cristo, and the historical fictions that really spark something in me and ignite a passion. And then I go and I read an era-specific historical book, and that's how I kind of always do my reading. It's a fiction, nonfiction, fiction, nonfiction, in a same genre or era, and it always triggers something in my heart and in my soul and in my brain that I get passionate about. And most recently, The Count of Monte Cristo, and during the French Revolutions. But I kept rereading when they were burrowing through the tunnel to escape, and the priest was explaining to him the finance and economics of how countries become corrupt and how people get ultimate power. And I'm seeing that right now in the United States. And
so that's striking a big chord.
Yeah, and it's really pulling on my heart as as a libertarian, as an American, as a soldier, and as somebody that just loves freedom. As we just said, freedom is always on the far side of hard work. And this show is doing that. It's lighting people's fire, their passion over something new. For you, it's something that you've committed your career, James, to do.
Well, for me, it's fascinating because we get to go, as a one-man band historian writing books, do you have to work hard for your access. Okay, you can go and interview veterans, and I've interviewed some 350 World War II veterans from all around the world, and that has been an immense privilege and just fascinating, as you can imagine. I've been to God knows how many archives all around the world, but there's all the other stuff that you, as just a one-man band historian, you cannot get to see. What television allows you to do, it opens doors, it opens avenues. So this week, and I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, but we've seen this, the first ever proper map of the inside of the Obersalzberg. No one's ever produced something like this before. I don't want to kind of give too much away, but that is, as a historian, that's incredibly exciting, because you're suddenly seeing new research, new material, new light on something that has been buried for a long time, and that's great.
We have been.
Why wouldn't I want to do that?
We were awarded access into places that people haven't been in 20, 30, 40 years.
Yes, I've just made a show in northeast India, Tim, about the Battle of Imphal, which actually was, in terms of the British-Japanese experience, was the biggest land battle of the war in the Far East. In fact, actually, in terms of men on the ground, it was bigger than anything that the Americans were involved in the Pacific. Obviously that was restricted by the scale of the islands on which you're fighting, but it was a massive, massive and very, very decisive battle. Had it gone wrong for the British, the Japanese would have invaded India, been the end of the Raj. That would have been the end of the hump, the American supply route to the nationalists in China. So the Japanese might have won in China after all. It could not have been more important. And I was making this film about this out there, and I was going and seeing trenches and positions which no British historian has looked at since 1945. Wow, was that thrilling. I mean, that was just amazing. So you're on top of this hill in this jungle, Burma's that way, India, plains of Imphal are behind me. This is where it happened, and no one's been there. And I'm standing in a kind of, a foxhole.
So the reasons that we are so committed to, we'll just say we're committed to history. Your passion is contagious, and you can see it in your novels. You can get it in your podcast. You can go to your event and experience. You can follow you on Twitter and see it. For me, it's also an occupational thing. I am now 15 years in special operations. I will probably have another 10, maybe 15 years in the military. I'm moving into an era of my career where I'm going to have to make really hard and horrible sometimes decisions, and I don't want to make those being ignorant about who's made the same decision in the past 1,000 years. And I promise you, no matter how important you think you are, even if you're General Mattis, even if you're McMaster, the reason that they're successful is because they've been obsessed with history.
Correct.
And if you look at the ones that have failed, the Schwarzkopfs in the invasion, where Bush is like, no, don't go into Baghdad, just stop there. And then we have to go in 3 years later. Yeah. It's because they don't understand the history, and do not be so proud, and do not be so arrogant to think that no one has been there before. You are not the first. Somebody's been there 1,000 times before.
So agree with everything you're saying. I mean, I really, really do. It's just so important. And this is my big bugbear. Is Schwarzkopf. Besides, in my experience, most military men and women know their history. In the British Armed Forces, we go on battlefield studies. We do these staff rides. We go to Sicily or Normandy or the Western Front or whatever, or the Peninsular War in Spain in the Napoleonic era, and we study it and we learn those lessons and we apply them to what we're doing now in the armed forces. All well and good. That's fantastic. Can you say the same about the cabinet? Can you say the same about those in government, those in political power? The answer is no. And it's sort of, we're really busy being Prime Minister and being the cabinet. We haven't got time for this sort of stuff. And as Mattis said in that famous viral email that kind of went all around the world, the problem with not having time to read and know your history is that you're then a lesser soldier, that you're then, you're going to make mistakes. And he's absolutely bang on the money.
But the people that are making these decisions right now, both in your country and ours, don't care about history, or they want history only to support their agenda, which in my opinion is propaganda, and that they've never experienced history. I need every one of those four-term congressmen and women to go to Iraq, put on a body armor, and go on a patrol through the streets.
Yes.
That's what they need to do. They need to go to South Africa, and they need to walk into Joburg, and they need to see what really happened after apartheid. They need to go up into Zimbabwe, and you want to understand, what the legislation that you're making in Africa, and as you're passing things off to SOCAF and AFCOM, and an area of the world that I'm working, but not not one of them has been there and seen what the Boko Haram does firsthand. And that is not the first group that has done it. It's the 50th, or the 100th, or the 2000th, because it just keeps happening through history.
And how many people, you talk about South Africa specifically, most people don't realize that the Nelson Mandela who went out on a boat to Robben's Egg Island was not the Nelson Mandela that came back from Robben's Egg Island. And the successes that he had afterwards were because of some personal catharsis that he had during that time. And I'm not condemning, we could do shows upon shows upon shows talking about what he did before and what he did after and his approach and the mistakes that he made because he's human. But you have to look at it through the whole lens. And I think a big mistake that in our military academies in the United States, the Naval Academy and West Point, of course, they do emphasize military history. Where, in my experience, where I have seen senior officers that fail is they only look at history to evaluate successes. This army was successful. Let's look at what they did. You need to look at the armies that failed, because that's where you learn. It's like, and again, I'm taking everything back to jiu-jitsu, right? You either win or you learn. Yeah. So it's oftentimes in defeat are the greatest lessons that you can carry forward, in my opinion.
Same with shooting. I love watching those guys that only post the videos of their hits. Yeah, man, I can run my GoPro and my phone next to my targets when I'm doing, El Presidente, and I can show you my fast times. But do you know what? Show me your misses. That's what I post. I show my misses, and you see me try to get better after that. You're either you're winning or you're improving. You're either hitting or you're getting faster. And you have to balance between those two. This has been, I think, one of my favorite conversations that we've ever had on this podcast, James. We've only got, this is the first time we've got to work together, and it has been.
Hasn't it been fun?
It's been every single day. I have been thrilled about.
We've had a laugh.
Getting up. We work 14, 15-hour days sometimes, and there's a sense of anticipation and excitement that I get to hang out with you all day long.
Well, the feeling's mutual. I've learned a lot from talking to you guys.
How excited I was flying over, knowing that I was getting to travel with two of my favorite people to travel with. And that you guys, and all along I'm thinking, I wonder how they're getting along. And then when you sent me that picture of the two of you together, and I could tell they're getting along great. This is going to be awesome.
What's great is that, particularly on this stuff, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. We all feel exactly the same way, and we have the same concerns and worries. I mean, my concerns are drawn, obviously, from history. You have first-hand of experience about how bad things can get, and there's no question that the world faces troubling times ahead. It feels like we're on a tipping point now, and hunting Hitler is to a certain extent a light-hearted show. You see us kind of sort of crewing around, romping around, going into caves, dashing around with torches and jumping in and out of helicopters and all that kind of stuff, which is all great and all good fun. But it does have a serious point too, and the research is good. The stuff we're unearthing, and it just reminds people of just how despicable that regime was, and we need to make sure we never forget that stuff.
We are coming to a period of history where we're going to have to make some very tough decisions.
Some compromising decisions.
Very, very, very. I mean, some of them might be horrible. If you're looking at Europe right now, if you're looking at what has happened in the past 2 weeks in the UK, where they are now talking about concentration camps and walking through the street, the flip side of that is doing nothing, and you are literally going to be in the streets fighting. Both are horrible options. But do you know what the solution and the answer to all of this is, and where you can find the information to give you the right decision? History. You have to go to history. We're not going to be like we did in 1941, start walking around and grabbing Japanese and throwing them in concentration camps because of Pearl Harbor.
So there are no original ideas. You know how many times I've heard that throughout my life? And that includes the bad ideas. So you have to look at the mistakes of the past
100%.
In order to avoid them going forward in the future.
James, where can people find you?
Yeah, so my website is griffonmerlin.com, which is the name of the two engines that powered the Spitfire.
Love it.
So it's Griffon, Griffon, Merlin as in the wizard.com. Or you can find me at James1940 on Twitter or at James Holland 1940 on Instagram.
Got it.
And I will have links to all of those in the show notes. Make sure you follow James. If you're a fan of the show, you probably are already. But if not, you need to. We are perfect on time. We ended on some great points. We're at 54 minutes.
And I'm also going to say that I'm coming over to the States and giving a whole series of talks this autumn, this fall, as you say in the USA.
We'll find that list and we'll get it up. If you have an opportunity to listen to this man talk in person, it's a privilege, and his passion and excitement is contagious, and you have to get on board.
Absolutely. Looking at the time, the local Austrian time here, I see that the van is downstairs waiting for us to take us Nazi hunting. So I'm going to wrap this up. And in honor of our British cousin, I'm going to end with a quote from Winston Churchill.
Ah, love that.
I'm not going to try to do the accent, though, because I don't think I can pull it off. An appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile, hoping it will eat him last. Remember that, everybody, and until next time, be a sheepdog.
You have been listening to the Sheepdog Project. Follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Sheepdog Response. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the individual and do not represent any larger entity, public or private.